Hello, and welcome to the first ever episode of the RP Book Club. I'm your host, Rosie Peat, and I am so excited to be able to finally share this with you. For anyone who doesn't know, the RP Book Club is a brand new monthly podcast and online platform from Rebellion Publishing. Each month, we pick a book club book, and the author joins me here on the podcast to talk about their experiences writing the book and answer your questions, as well as giving us an exclusive reading. Book club members who are signed up to the newsletter or who listen to the podcast also get an exclusive discount code to use for each month's book. This month's code is JBC-21-HB, and you can use that code to get 20% off the paperback and the ebook from the Rebellion Publishing bookshop. This month, I'm incredibly excited to be speaking to the completely brilliant Alex de Campi about our book club book, Heartbreak Incorporated. Alex de Campi is an acclaimed writer of graphic novels, as well as for film, TV, and of course, novels. Her work includes Eisner-nominated graphic novels like Bad Girls, Twisted Romance, and she's killed off most of Riverdale twice in Archie vs. Predator 1 and 2. And of course, the fascinating, dark, and very, very sexy book we're here to talk about today. Alex, welcome to the RP Book Club.
Thanks, Rosie. I'm really looking forward to this. The book's been a huge labor of love of mine, and it's really exciting. It's almost out.
I know. I'm so, anybody who's spoken to me at any point in the last few months has already heard me yell about this book. I have now read it a grand total of 4 times, and I can't get enough.
And it's not short. It's not short.
No, it's not. It's just, yeah,
I'm
honestly.
unable to write a novel under 100,000 words. They always end up long.
Yeah, I literally got to the end the first time and just went right back around, immediately back around.
Well, there's so many twisty things in it that there's a temptation to do that because you want to go, oh, if I had read this more carefully, would I have seen that coming? And the answer is no, because the twists are
exactly.
Done. But also, it's fun once you know what the twists are to go back and read where they were hinted at earlier in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing when I did go back the second time, kind of picking up on those little clues. I'm wondering, how many did I spot the first time? Did I know the first time? It really catches that wannabe detective heart of mine.
Well, I mean, the lead character is essentially a wannabe. I mean, she's not a wannabe detective. She's a wannabe investigative journalist. And that's one of the fun things about Evie, who's our lead. She's about 25 years old. She's at that stage where she went to Northwestern University in the US and was a journalism major. And that's a really prestigious private university in the US and one of its specialties is journalism. But journalism is dying. Like the old way of doing journalism is very much dead. You know, you used to join a newspaper on the local news desk and move your way up. Magazines exist as this weird fusion of online and offline. Very few people are on staff anymore. Everyone's freelance. I see long time experienced great journalist friends of mine laid off, like left, right, and center. The websites are closing down. And this is when Evie decides to get into investigating and telling the truth. And so she's at that stage that you hit a lot of times, like throughout your life as a creative, but especially in your mid-20s when you don't know if your day job is really just your job. You know, she's been temping forever. And I spent a lot of time temping too. You know, I think one of the most interesting things to ask anyone in the creative arts is tell me your wackiest temp job, or tell me the wackiest nickel and dime job you did to make money.
Oh, yeah.
Because we all I have so many. And everyone does. We've all done ridiculous things from working in the pub to, doing night jobs to you name it. And so Evie's been doing that. She's been essentially secretarial temping because it provides good money. She walked off her last job due to an abusive boss and hasn't had some work in a bit. And she's at that stage where her roommate who has the lease on the apartment is a good friend, Claudia. But it's getting to the point where Evie really needs to start coming up with rent now. Or she needs to leave and go back home to her parents in Chicago. So she's trying to get a job. So there's a lot of my own feelings about journalism and freelancing and being young and trying to make your dreams work that I've poured into Evie. And there's a lot of sort of gentle and not so gentle satire about the world of New York, which was coached along by a few New York journalist friends of mine. I always like to say they're responsible for all the viciously accurate parts, and all the totally incorrect parts are all me. But when we meet Evie, she's very much, on her last legs of whether she can stay in the big city or whether she has to go back home. And again, I think that's for all of us who move to a big city to try to do bigger things. I think there's always a stage where we think, are we really going to make it? Can I stay here? Or, should I go back home and live in my parents' spare bedroom and do my creative work there? Or should I accept that my day job is my job and I'm not going to be able to do this? Or what's going to become of me? What's going to become of my dreams? And that's where we meet her.
You've really hit that pain point where you have to either do one or the other, right? You have to either make this intimidating, difficult city work for you and actually make it a real life rather than living in some terrible studio flat like I was in London pre-pandemic, or you leave and you pursue either what you've been pursuing or something else somewhere else. And it really, you can feel that tension just bubbling up in every moment inside Evie. And I know as somebody, I've done my share of crazy, ridiculous jobs that make no sense. And that people are going, hey, what's your career path? And you're going, I don't know, I'm just trying to do this thing. And you can just really feel that in every bit, particularly early on in the book.
Evie says she lived off hot chocolate. And that happened to me. I was temping in London and helping a lawyer organize their office, like just tons of filing work. And it was a 1-week job. And because other people at the temp agency hadn't turned in their timesheets, they didn't run the payroll. So the payroll was a week late. And I had no money. And I was literally living off the packets of hot chocolate in the break room at the law firm. And it was kind of a shitty law firm, so they didn't have like the really posh break room and all the leftover conference stuff. I lived off those too.
And that's why Evie was so keen to try and get one of those jobs on the upper floors, right, with all the free sandwiches and
leftover like croissant from the morning meeting and like the Nespresso machine.
It's so true. She says, pretty early on when she's going in for the interview, and she says, a smart girl could live off, never have to buy food, could just live off the leftovers. And I've done that in my time. I'm pretty sure everyone I know who's creative has had to do that at some point or other.
Yeah. And I was working in journalism a little bit when I lived in Hong Kong, and I was covering some of the social stuff as well. And you could also live off the white wine and the really crappy white wine and the crudité you get at various openings. So there's this consciousness of so many people living this way and who have gone through this, and people don't talk about it.
No. And I don't know whether it's some want to and not admit it, right? You don't want to admit that it was ever this difficult sometimes, or people don't. They want to feel like, yeah, I was just that great that it came naturally, or a terror of going back to it.
Yes. And, they don't talk about how shitty the apartments are either. Like if you're renting in New York, it's punishing. It's absolutely punishing how little you get for a gigantic amount of money. And in London too, obviously, London's gotten really terrible. And you read these books about people starting off in New York City and they've got a 2-bedroom apartment. And you're like, no, a friend of mine was writing a book with a heroine set in New York, and she had the person living in Hell's Kitchen because that's where I live, and she lives in North Carolina. And she's like, oh, well, they have this kind of like 3-bedroom apartment. And I'm like, no, they don't.
Yeah, no.
They have a 1-bedroom apartment. One of them lives in the bedroom. The other one lives in the living room. They have clothes rails. They don't have any closets. In the bedroom they can fit a twin bed, and you can still touch both walls and you can stand your hands. That's how they live. Oh, and there are cockroaches.
Just to add to the fun.
Yeah. And I think the only way to make interesting characters is to be very, very specific about them. And in that sort of specificness, you achieve a sort of universality, because even though someone hasn't lived off hot chocolate packet for a week, they might have lived off something. They might have lived off like the break room cookies. And everyone's got some sort of experience where there's no way they're going to make rent that week. They have less than $20 in their bank account, or they're overdrawn, and they're just living off anything they can. It's just part of growing up, unless you have wildly rich parents.
One thing I think was really interesting, and actually I only really picked up on it this last time I was reading the book, is at no point do we really get a physical description of Evie. Like, not a really detailed one. She has curly hair, but we're slightly removed from that. And yet throughout the book, she's observing this sort of the beauty of others and the role that plays in their interactions. And I'm wondering whether that was a deliberate choice to kind of make her feel separate from that.
It was. I also wanted people to see themselves in Evie as much as possible. And though I'm very specific about everything else, Evie isn't the sort of person who's going to sit there and describe herself. There's no ebony darkness, dementia, raven way in this, she's just going to her own personality, her looks. I mean, she's short. She has like curly dark hair. She doesn't find herself very attractive, especially compared to all these people who have a ton of money around her. And so she's kind of self-obsessed in some ways, but not really about her appearance, especially compared to everybody else that we're meeting in the book. And I did want to make as many different readers as possible see themselves in Evie, and themselves into her and her experiences. So that was somewhat of a deliberate choice.
It's interesting. I was wondering about it on a couple of levels. I was curious as to whether there was kind of something there about beauty as value and beauty as an identifier. And this is kind of something we see wider in the book, not necessarily specifically related to Evie, but if we look at, say, Celine later on, she's overlooked, right to the last, because she's this beautiful ex model, and nobody thinks, hey, maybe she's the villain. Maybe she's behind this. And I think it's really interesting to see that play out.
One of the most influential books I've read actually has been The Tale of Genji, the old the Japanese novel, which is really a story about what happens to women when power leaves them behind. There's a lot of the old wives and concubines of the emperor and of his surrounding family who are now just kind of living like the old emperor's dead or retired, and they're old and they have no purpose anymore. So they're existing without, they're continuing to exist once their purposes has left them to be a beautiful object, and their source of power by association has left them. And that's very much what Celine is. She is Mackenzie Bezos, for example, a beautiful woman, desperately wanted to be a novelist, married the man who owns the biggest bookstore in the world, so no one would ever take her seriously as a novelist again. It's like, I wish I could be successful in books. Monkey's paw curls. While Mackenzie is a very kind person and in a way evil, I imagined what happened when, wealthy men are allowed to get away with a lot all the time. It's almost seen as natural that, like, after a while, when their first wife is older and not very interesting, they move on to someone who's new and young and exciting and makes them feel young and attractive again, rather than wandering around in their grungy underwear and just being like, yeah, honey, not tonight.
The rich dude version of buying a sports car, because they already have all the sports cars.
Yes, exactly. So I think there was, Celine is the villain, but also I think there's a sense of tragedy to her, because she has no value in Silicon Valley society. She's no longer beautiful. She's no longer willing to put up with all the boys' bullshit or interesting enough, because there's always young girls coming out who will put up with the frat boy atmosphere of a startup to be like the pick me, the one among with in the sandbox with all the boys. We've met that girl. Avoid the fuck out of her. If you're not like other girls, please, that's a giant red flag.
Oh God.
I'm like, please just be like other girls.
It's other girls are great. Be like other girls. Other girls are amazing.
Be friends with other girls.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be a contest.
It doesn't. And I've met plenty of the have to be the only one in the sandbox with the boys in various industries I've been in. And so she's excluded from the sandbox. She has no massive technical skills, so she's not going to go off and like do her own startup. So she's valueless, and her only value was her beauty. And I think this is a really fascinating theme in a lot of my work. I mean, I'm also obsessed with Seneca's Phaedra, which is another story along that line, a great classic story. So I wove a lot of that into it. There's a lot of the value of beauty in society is very much inherent in almost all of the book.
Yeah. And then of course, Celine, going back to Celine, she, feeling that lack of power, seizes power in a huge way, in the only way she feels is left available to her.
I mean, the main concept of the book, which we actually haven't even gotten to, is Evie ends up joining as a secretary, as a personal assistant to a small investigative agency whose purpose is to break up relationships. The principle of the book is, there are 1,000 apps and services and everything to get people together. And in New York City, there's one agency to tear them apart. And so if you want a divorce and have signed a prenup and want to have the other person divorce the other person for cause, you set them up. Photographs are taken, the divorce has gone through. But also, if you want to get rid of a mistress, it's really fascinating. So if you think your partner is cheating on you and you want to get rid of the person they're cheating with, you contact Misha's agency and
there really is somebody for everything. If you have enough money, you can get anything done.
Or if you have if you're wealthy and you have a 20-year-old son or daughter, and they've chosen someone that you think is absolutely ruinous as a partner, that's how you get rid of them.
I can just imagine the rabbit holes you went down doing the research for this.
A lot of the relationships written about in the book have a kernel of truth in them or are based on something that actually happened. There's a side note about a tech billionaire buying a town and paying for all his friends, air quotes friends, to come live there before he just completely burned out on drugs. A little Googling, you can find out who that actually was, and it actually happened.
So that's what I'm doing after this.
And the universe just keeps handing me things. I need to write. Please buy a lot of copies of this book so I can write a trilogy, because the world keeps giving me ideas for more relationships to write about. There was a whole story about California real estate multi-millionaire who pursued this Instagram influencer, and she decided that he was way too controlling and awful, and now he has proved the fact that he is very controlling and awful and has violated restraining orders and stuff. And this poor Instagram cutie is just like, I got some handbags off him, but now I want him to go away, and he's not the rich man I've been around. She got a whole apartment off him for a year. I mean, girl hustled, and then he just turned out to be a creepazoid who wanted to control her every move. Which is the downside of the attraction, the beauty as business model.
Yeah, completely. We see that business model kind of on, it feels like in two ways, right? We see it on the side of Celine, where it's really ending. It's really or ending or ended, and her value is now gone. And then we see it on the other side, it being leveraged by Misha to achieve what he needs to achieve.
And then Evie, who's always been that girl who's like, oh, if a boy I like is doing something, I'm going to do it too and do it really well so he notices me. Let me tell you now, that does not work.
Oh, I've lived that mistake.
We've all
I
lived
know.
That one. Yes. But it means you can potentially use crushes, a combination of innocent crushes and spite to get yourself where you want to go as a career. So Evie's feeling like, she wants to be appreciated, but she also just feels like she lost, somewhere along the line, there was a manual about how to girl, how to high femme that just got lost in the post to her. And so she doesn't know how to be, she doesn't know how to be like Gemma, who also had a terrible time. And who's the flip side of Evie. Gemma is the youngest of several children, all brothers. She organizes men like that. She's blonde,
Yeah.
she's pretty, she does the heels, she does the makeup, she's thin. And Evie can't tone herself down to be acceptable around men with fragile egos, which is 90% of men. And then she meets Misha, who does not have a fragile ego.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the hearts of their friendship is that she can push him really hard and he'll just push back.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people that I know, and for myself, it's that constant narrative where we've been told we're too much as women. Yes. You know, you're too much, you're too loud.
You're too pushy, you're too,
always too something. Yes. And why can't you be like those other girls that are the small and will just shrink and fit in? Yeah, exactly.
Because we deserve to take up space.
Exactly. Obviously, Evie is kind of in conflict with that. And I think it was really fantastic to see through the book. It felt like she was starting to realize that and take up space more.
Yes. Yes.
So she's setting out for this career in journalism, right? So she wants to make it as a journalist, be successful and achieve. I feel like she kind of gets that, but in a way weirder form than she intended.
She very much got what she wanted in terms of using the skills that she wanted to use, but she's not doing it in the way she thought she was. What she really wants at the beginning of the book is to land a lead feature at a magazine, investigative feature at a magazine, and she's come close to it. She's assisted people, she's interned. In joining Heartbreak Incorporated, she has this potential to essentially rat out Misha's agency, and one of the cases it's taking on as a blockbuster feature. Then journalism gets in the way a little bit.
Yeah,
and all of that stuff is true about the scandal that she wants to report upon is involving a family that have a successful retail empire, a successful fashion empire. And she's immediately told by her magazine editor contact, by Nicole, that they can't run that story because
don't go anywhere near it.
the fashion company's an advertiser, and this is real. This is absolutely real. That's why you
completely
don't handles in the fashion industry or any major advertiser like. In a magazine, they'll investigate the shit out of everything else before they do that. What she thought was this very easy, well, we'll just write about this family, turns into, no, you have to sell out the entire agency you're working for, and then we can talk in passing about this family, but not enough that it's a focus, and we might be looking at past legal and past sales. It's a very real part of any journalistic process that the goal you start out with and the story you end up with can be wildly different, sometimes because of what you discover, sometimes because of the issues around publication.
It feels like Evie is fighting against that as she's still trying to hang on to the last pieces of being a journalist.
Yes.
And I think something really powerful later on in the book, kind of as she's already been through a lot, and we come to a point where she's, you describe it so well, she's laying her journalistic hopes aside. It causes her no more regret than giving up an old once loved coat that she never wears anymore. And I think that is just such a powerful thing. And when I read it, I just thought, that's that feeling. That's that feeling of going, this doesn't fit me anymore. This isn't what I thought it was, and I'm gonna have to move on. But then immediately we're followed up with, okay, well, how do you be happy when you have no plan for it?
Yes.
So she's given this thing up and gone, okay, that kind of feels okay, but now what? Now, what is there now? I have no plan.
Yeah. What am I? Am I a secretary? Is that what I am? Is that and I think we pair a lot of this with Evie's roommate, Claudia, who's, and Evie has these grand dreams. She's going to win a Pulitzer. She's going to break through the glass ceiling of this world in this dying art form. Claudia, is a caterer. She runs bar at fancy catering events. That's what she does. That's what she wants to do. That is Claudia's dream. Maybe run her own thing. That's it. So Evie's kind of like, oh, well, I don't want to be just a secretary. All the while conscious that her roommate and best friend, Claudia, is just a caterer, is just, a bartender. But that's what Claudia wants. And so Evie's constantly reconciling, like, is there something wrong with me that I won't settle? Is there something, am I being unfair? Because Gemma, just a secretary, an incredibly good one. And, what is Evie being a snob? Is she like, and these are all questions she's constantly asking herself. Is she chasing after something that she should just simply shouldn't bother with? Like, is there something really okay and fine with just a secretary? And of course there is. People do what makes them happy. Like she the problem is she hasn't really found what's made her happy. Claudia knows what makes her happy. Gemma loves organizing men. She's great at it. She knows what makes her happy. So people have chosen what makes them happy as a career. And Evie's like, I'm not happy ever. I'm not satisfied. I haven't found the thing that satisfies me, that challenges me, that makes me feel worthwhile, where I fit. And so I think that's a lot of her process of realizing that the reality of journalism can never match what she saw in her head.
Yeah, completely. And I did wonder a little bit about, for a lot of young women trying to work in journalism or going through that process, there's a lot of chipping away at yourself in terms of pillaging your own experience and your own feelings and being for content.
It's been terrible over the past 5 years. It's like editors on sites are using inexperienced female journalists for clickbait and setting them up to write opinion pieces and my trauma, please read about it pieces that just set them up to become the internet's main character of the day. And there's no sense of that these women are being protected, or even that someone's taking them aside and going, well, here's what's really going to happen if you publish that. Here are the risks. Like, I appreciate that you want to share all this, but maybe you should not. It's just, oh, well, you have to get clicks.
And I think, again, that's another space where then the editorial process, even if you're fully aware of what's going on and you consciously make that decision, you then have the process where your story and the story that you're giving is edited.
Yes.
And so it's not.
And the pull quotes are going to be the most inflammatory, outrageous, the lead's going to be something, the summary you see on Twitter is absolutely not going to be the actual article. It's going to make it seem as outrageous and inflammatory as possible. I mean, I've had plenty of friends who just simply hated the headlines attached to their stories and found them wildly, unmatched to what the real meat of the story was.
I feel like we've gone off on a journalism tangent, but I'm not mad about it.
Well, we tried to get the industry as real as possible. And, one of the fun running jokes of the book is that everything is run by interns.
Yeah. Having called this a very sexy book in the top line, we really haven't talked about the sex, and there is a lot of it, and it's extremely good.
Yeah, I like writing sex. I mean, I think there's a lot of similarities to writing good action and writing good sex, because one is just vertical choreography and the other one is horizontal choreography. And as with any fight scene, if you just write people hitting each other, it's not really that interesting. So there has to be some sort of emotional arc within the scene, or realization, or something else has to be happening in terms of character development during the fight scene. I think that's so that's why fight scenes and sex scenes are so difficult. Is not only are you dealing with the physical choreography of who's doing what to whom, when often in a fight scene you have multiple people. I mean, in a sex scene you can have multiple people too, but that's like, that's advanced expert level. So in a fight scene, you have to give a sense of danger at all times. You have to know where all the characters are, or conveniently obscure the location of a character if you want to surprise somebody. And then you have to have an emotional arc within all of it. So that's why it's quite challenging. And I think one thing comics has really helped me with is being able, because I write graphic novels. One thing about comics is I have to tell I have to communicate with the artist about what's happening in this fight scene. And there are many ways to write fight scenes. A lot of comics artists just go like, the comics writers just go fight scene here, 4 pages, you know, like, and they just leave the artist to deal with it. And I've always felt that's kind of an abnegation of responsibility to the artist. I fully describe the fight scene and then kind of have a health note at the top going, you know, like, Ed, you can ignore all of this if you want. Like, here's my basic idea, like per panel, here's what's happening. Feel free to just throw that in the bin. And I'm so used to doing that, and I've done so much of it that planning out fight scenes isn't that hard. And we have the great, you know, the first fight scene in the book is that great like museum hallway fight.
Yes.
With a champagne bottle. And then the sex scenes as well, you know, you're planning out who's doing what to whom and keeping an air, you know, enough of an air of mystery about it, while keeping it propelled forward by sort of emotion. And you know, I've read a lot of fanfic, and fanfic is really, really good at sex scenes. You know, sometimes when my brain is just exhausted, which is 99% of the time, I'll just pull open a fic because it's like, well, I don't need any character introduction. I know who these characters are, even if it's an AU, and then they just go do it. Like, generally there's going to be a happy ending unless it's like tagged. You know, there are all these people who are really, really good at writing sex scenes, and I've read a lot of them, and got tips. And realize that actually it's okay to write sex scenes because quite a lot of people want to read them. Because there's always like, am I being too dirty? I'm like, you know, like, and so I just thought, well, I'm just going to be dirty. Everyone who knows me knows I'm dirty. So like, why falsely advertise?
Yeah. It is interesting. I think thinking about writing sex scenes, I wonder how many authors avoid it because they don't want to, they feel kind of shame around it or feel very weird about it or don't want to let that part of themselves influence like out into the public space.
Yeah, that they're going to be judged on their own sexual performance by how they write it. And like we do, like, I mean, when there's like Jeffrey Eugenides tries to write sex, it you know, or Morrissey, we all mock them horribly.
That is true.
Don't Google their sex scenes, kids, unless you need a really good laugh. I think there's a point at which, I mean, I'm a mid-career writer. I think there's a point at which you just stop. You know, people are going to come for you anyway, so you just stop caring in a way. And you realize that Goodreads is not for you, so you never go read your Goodreads because that is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, that is good advice for any and all writers. If anyone's thinking about being a writer, don't go read your own reviews.
Yeah,
it's a bad idea.
It's not for you. It did take a while to feel freed up enough to write sex and to write violence. I got there, and I'm perfectly happy with it. I mean, you know, I think she writes great sex scenes is a great compliment.
Oh yeah,
I'm not upset. And if anyone tries to shame me for it, like, I'm sorry, I'm good at sex scenes. Like, just deal with it. Yeah, I encourage young writers to experiment. I mean, I think one of the hardest things about writing, and we'll just go into some writing craft here, and why it took me so long to get around to prose after being a script person for so long, was that the work you like to read and the style you like to read is often not the style you write in. So, you know, I love like very lyrical, descriptive, literary prose. I do not write that way. I write very spare, you know, surgically descriptive work that's full of a lot of like forward momentum and action. And so it took me a really long time to realize that, you know, no, I was not in fact this great evocative literary Victorian writer. I was more on the Hemingway side of things, and I should just embrace that. We put so many obstacles in our way as writers because we try to be other people. And it takes a very long time to find your own voice. I mean, it takes about 100,000 words to find your own voice, at least. Depending on your maturity level and your ability to just like fucking go for it. And it took me a long time, and I finally now know what I do, and what I do is things like Heartbreak Incorporated. You know, it is I write twisty, propulsive thrillers with a fair amount of sex and violence, and then I get in the small literary bits and the insights where I can, because there's no saying that just because something is genre, you can't have some sort of meaningful insight in it. It's almost more fun too, because nobody expects it, and then you blindside them. And also they're fun. Like, I think we don't let ourselves have fun enough. I think it's okay to have fun. I think it's okay to write things that are enjoyable. I mean, it's so hard. Like, writing a novel is hard. Like, it's a whole 100,000 words. And so if you're going to do this thing, you might as well do it with something that's fun for you. So, have fun, and people do like to read sex, and if they don't, they'll just skip those parts. If they're entertained by the story and they averse to reading about sex, which is perfectly fine. Like, I have plenty of asexual friends who really don't like anything like that. They'll skip it or they won't read it, and that's fine, because your book is not for everybody. And that's another thing you have to accept, is there are people out there who are just not going to be into the things you're into, and that is fine.
Yeah, there's something incredibly powerful in life and in writing of just allowing yourself to be and allowing the work to be, without trying to make it fit into a mold that it just isn't.
And there's an expectation that because everyone is contactable everywhere now, that you can just go on Twitter and at me, or like comment on my Instagram or something like that, that you have to please everybody, and you do not, in fact. It's okay. You don't have to answer them. You don't have to justify yourself. The greatest bit of advice I can give to any writer is never complain and never explain. Sometimes people just want to shout at you because that's how they're feeling, and that's about them.
My favorite motto in life in general is other people's shit is about other people's shit.
Yes. And I think the other great piece of advice, though, it's not really related to writing, it's more just life in general, that I got was become the person you want to fall in love with.
Let's talk a little bit about representation in the book in terms of gender and sexuality.
It's yes.
Yes. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of every spectrum of gender and sexuality represented in the book, in general, in very sympathetic ways. Claudia is the roommate is an out lesbian. She's adorable. She finds love by the end in the most adorably lesbian way.
Oh yeah.
And then moves in with her like 2 weeks later.
Yep.
Misha is extremely pansexual. Evie is not sure if she's 100% bisexual or not. Like, she's curious, but she also doesn't want to be that straight girl who like leads someone on and then runs away. So she's like still questioning. Like, she hasn't really explored that side of herself because she hasn't had the opportunity or hasn't found anyone she's attracted to. That slightly changes in the book in interesting ways.
In very interesting ways.
One of the main relationships, the first relationship we really encounter that the agency is working on, is a fashion designer who's married to the son, a male fashion designer is married to the son of this big New York City fashion dynasty. And while that relationship is not a healthy relationship, it's not because they're queer, it's because the scion of the fashion dynasty is an absolute raging asshole.
Yeah.
It's very easy to write all this. I mean, these are just normal relationships that normal people are having, in a way. It's not sensationalized or anything. I mean, just people.
It's frustrating. It shouldn't be refreshing to read a story featuring characters of all different sexualities where the story isn't about that and about some coming out trauma or some experience going through that. But it is. Just read a book where the sexuality wasn't the story.
In a book that's all about sexuality and all about relationships, it's not like, oh, well, scandal, they're gay.
Yeah.
Well, they're gay. Everyone knows they're gay. Everyone's fine with it.
Yeah.
But this guy's an asshole. And
unrelated. This guy's
unrelated. Like, no. And Misha never really experiences any pushback against his sexuality. I mean, he puts someone through a fucking window if they did. So there's also that.
That helps.
Misha, fight me, Mezarov. Misha was tremendous fun to write as a character. There's a lot more to him than initially you think there is. He comes off as this wealthy, pretty boy who runs this agency. And Evie can't figure out why. Like, he clearly has money. He comes from money. Like, it's blindingly obvious that he's some like Eurotrash pretty boy. And like, why is he even working in a way at something that actually requires, effort and subtlety? And so immediately when Evie meets him, she's like, this guy is like, there's something slightly off about this guy. So there's a lot of mystery about him and what he does and why he does it, and how he's reconciling the fact that what a lot of what his agency does is absolutely despicable. A big part of Evie's struggle is how she rationalizes like Misha, who's really interesting and seems to have actual morals, with what he's doing.
Okay, so there are lots of little clues in this book. There are so many clues, and it's taken me more than one read, more than two reads, to actually spot what I think is all of them, and probably still isn't. I'm guessing that was a lot of fun.
Yes. I mean, there's something really technically enjoyable about structuring a thriller, especially with so many sharp twists and turns, because they have to feel genuine. You can just throw twists and turns in there without any clues ahead of time, but then they just feel weird. I've always loved and admired the pulp writing style where there's a cliffhanger at the end of every chapter. It's a really effective technique. And so that was something I always tried to achieve, because I'm always afraid that no one will really want to read my books. So I figure if I put a cliffhanger at the end of every chapter, then at least it'll propel them through. And even if they're at the end, they're like, wow, this is like Princes of Amber. This is like Princes of Amber. It's a bunch of garbage.
You still read it.
But you read it.
I mean, I'm gonna absolutely guarantee and certify that this is 100% not a piece of garbage.
I mean, imposter syndrome is real. We all struggle with it every day. So yeah, I love thinking about like things on a meta level and thinking about structure and form. It's something I do a ton in my work, do a ton of my comics work as well. And so the actual structure of, okay, we need some clues in this chapter about that, and we can hint at this there, and then we can, et cetera, is really, really enjoyable for me. And I think that's why I always default to thrillers. It needs to be exciting for me. And if it's not exciting for me, it's not exciting for you. And my definition of exciting is I really need to like just have it be really interesting and unexpected. As a writer, I need that. I need that challenge. I mentioned fanfic, and while I love fic, and while reading it has strengthened my grasp of emotional arcs a ton, 100,000 words of like, they don't do actually anything but pine and not communicate. Like even I find that tiring occasionally. Even when I'm like completely comfort reading. So yeah, that's the difference. And the emotional arc part is really important, because if I make you laugh, if I make you gasp, like I've got you for the book, you'll be happy. You'll have a happy experience. If I make you cry, I have you forever. So yeah, I mean, I think it's important, as well as the clues and the formal structure and the excitement of a really well done, structurally well done thriller, is you have to really emotionally invest in the characters and their arcs. I think one thing I should also mention about writing thrillers for any young writers out there is a thriller is written in the rewrites. I say I don't rewrite. That's a lie. I don't think I rewrite, but I'm constantly rewriting. Like I write longhand a lot and then transfer it over. And I've got like extensive structural notes in my paper notebook. Heartbreak Incorporated went from being like 87,000 words to about 105,000 on the rewrite. And I was tightening it up, once you do the first pass and put all the clues in and stuff, then you just stick it in a drawer for 6 months, because you need to just completely get away from it.
Yeah.
You have the luxury of doing this. Sometimes you don't, obviously. And then you take it back out and you can read it with clean eyes. I have it printed out at a local copy shop in like, plastic binder, and just go through and scrawl on the pages, double spaced. And then you just attack it and fix all the stuff that doesn't work. And that's where you really get the continuity of the clues and the balance of the story, and see all the little bits that are missing. You can tell when someone rushes a thriller because that's not there. People do. Sometimes you just don't have the luxury of it, or you don't have an editor that pushes you to bring it up to the level. And I would also recommend an extremely strong copy editor. I literally have every book I write sent to my copy editor, and I have a copy editor that I use. She's the one that turns around and goes, "You've used this word 3 times in this sentence." or and I'm going through it as well for that, but it really helps to have someone crawling over it going, this is the 3rd time you've used this metaphor in this book, and while it's good, maybe you should not do that.
Maybe 3 is too many.
And then and it is, if it's a particularly striking metaphor, even though the book is 100,000 words, it is too many. And I guarantee you, if you finish the copy editing process and you're like, words, how do they work? How I English good? That's what it is. The other thing I would recommend to young writers is, when you get edits back, open the email, read the edits, have a little cry, and then walk away from it for the weekend. Do not respond to your editor. Do not have opinions about the edits, just walk away from the whole manuscript for at least 3 days and just let that sit for a little while and then go and approach it. You know, you'd much rather have your editor tell you things than for it to be on Goodreads. So, you know, a work can always be made better. I mean, I truly believe that a novel is never finished, only abandoned. I could have continued to fiddle with bits of Heartbreak Incorporated for another 6 months, but luckily my editor was like, no.
It is time.
It is time.
It's going out into the world. We have a deadline. It's happening.
Give me the manuscript, Alex. I know. Yes. I think, I mean, every book is different. Every writer is different. I mean, that's the thing. It's like the strategy that worked for your first book may not work for your second book. You know, some books are just like they leap into your head fully formed like Athena, and they just bang their way out and off you go. Some books you fiddle with the outline for 5 years until you're watching some completely unrelated movie and you're like, oh no, that's how it works. Some books require extensive outlining. I mean, one thing that's always worked for me is not necessarily not writing sequentially, but not feeling like I actually had to do honest to God full English sentences. So you can just like sketch bits of it out. And it's not an outline, because an outline makes you think of those horrible things you had to do in school, like stop. No, an outline can just be a Word document or a bit of paper or a Google Doc or however you write, with just, you know, Misha goes to California, question mark, or like, you know, and like, how do we find out about this? And like, you can just, it doesn't have to be readable to anybody but you. And sometimes I look at my paper notes and I'm like, they're not even readable to me. Yeah, anyway that gets you there, it works. And just watch out for also writing advice from men, because there are a lot of people who have published like a book or two and they're like, let me tell you how to write a novel. It's like, congratulations, you've done the thing. Now you want to tell everybody, maybe don't do that. And the whole, like, you have to write 1,000 words a day, and like, you have to do this, and you're not a real writer. Like, shut the whole fuck up. I'm a single mom. I do not write 1,000 words a day. I sometimes go weeks without writing. Like, I can't. Like, I'm marketing. I'm working on graphic novel revisions. Like, I'm looking at art. You know, I'm always making the thing, you know, quietly when I have time. But some days no rain falls. And so that's all right. Do the best you can when you can. And if you can't, forgive yourself. I feel like there's often an assumption in all of this that you have the economic and family stability to be able to set aside part of your day every day to write. And that is not the case for a large part of the non-male. I know even a lot of guys have trouble doing that. I know plenty of single dads. But I think you have to accept that a lot of this writing advice is by people who have forgotten what it's like to be Evie and live on hot chocolate. I also joke that writers have the wife project and they have the mistress project. Or the so depending on what you're interested in, the husband project and the toy boy project. Like, you know, I leave it to you. You know, other options are available. So you have the project that you're like deep into and working on, and that's theoretically your main project. And then you have the project you run away to for fun. And that can be a fic. That can be like just something different. It can be a little trashier. You know. It's the easy one because it's new and hasn't presented all its problems yet.
But it will. They will come.
Yeah, because then you send the wife off to be published, and you marry the mistress, and you create a job vacancy.
Yeah,
and that's how writing works, kids.
Shall we do a couple of questions from people who have emailed in, which feels very like 90s TV show, but I love it.
Yeah.
The first is from James, and he would like to know what the inspiration for the character of Misha was.
I've had a character like Misha knocking around for a while. I mean, he is the live journal boyfriend character.
He is. He so is.
But no, Misha kind of has always been a sort of character I wanted to write. And it took me a while to find a way to make him interesting and not just the live journal boyfriend.
I will never be able to get that out of my head now.
I'm sorry.
It's just so accurate.
You know, I always have a space in my heart for like the dark-haired fighty one who's secretly a marshmallow, and that is very much what Misha is. And, I was interested in the sort of character he is. Hasn't been written very much, like that actual type. Like, there are similar ideas out there, but I haven't really seen anything with a character like him where I was able to take what he was and really kind of push the boundaries and explore it a little bit and create a really interesting sort of urban fantasy world around this, that didn't feel like I was retreading territory that's been gone over before.
Yeah. We have another question from Teresa, who says, there's a plethora of supernatural and paranormal romance with dating agencies and matchmaking going wrong. So why did you flip it to Breakups? What generated that idea?
I mean, there was already so much paranormal dating agency stuff. I mean, writing people falling in love is fairly easy. It's a more technical challenge. Like I was, and then it had to be set in the world of the super rich, because if he was just breaking up, like the nice couple down the road who owns Vega, what would Misha be doing there? Because he's vastly out of vastly out of that league. And B, kind of no one really cares if horrible billionaires are broken up, so I can do nasty things to their relationships and make them be awful people, and you're just like, yeah, get him, get his ass. So the choice of subject often then presents to you certain strictures that it has to be said in this world, because otherwise you're not going to be able to retain the reader's believability or the reader's interest and sympathy, because making Misha a sympathetic character is a challenge.
Yeah.
At first, also, he has to come off as completely unsympathetic. Like, he's hot as hell, but he's unsympathetic. And you have to keep dropping enough little breadcrumbs that maybe this guy isn't as awful as he seems, or maybe there's more there, and there's a mystery here. That was much more fun than they make people fall in love. Yeah, and I write conflicts. I write fighting. The relationship gone wrong thing is very much more of that softer emotional arc-based storytelling, where I probably wouldn't have as many chances for significant conflict as I would with Heartbreak. So Heartbreak was a story that I could tell better.
And now it's time for our reading. Alex, take it away.
Okay, so this is fairly early on in the book. Evie had an interview at Heartbreak Inc., did not get chosen, runs into Misha later. She gets a last-minute catering job with Claudia, who's catering an engagement party at the Temple of Dender at the Met, which is where really rich people have their parties. And she runs into Misha, who's attending the party, and a fight happens, not between her and Misha, but as Misha is taking his target that he's trying to seduce away from the party. And Evie witnesses and participates in that fight, memorably with a champagne bottle. So, about last night, Evie starts. Yes, Misha sighs. Stuart is initiating divorce proceedings against Greg Pickford, which is fair enough, considering that Greg is abusive. Meyer Lukens is the Pickford's law firm, and it was suggested Greg hire me to have a rather public affair with Stuart. The world and the family court will believe Stuart is a cheater long before they'll believe that Greg is the reason Stuart always wears long sleeves and those big glasses, even though he has perfectly serviceable contact lenses. So I seduced Stuart over the course of the last few weeks, and I have the very explicit photos to prove it in court. He looks down. Stuart was an easy target. People like him always are. That's horrible, Evie says. The poor guy's trying to get out of an abusive relationship, and you slept with him, Misha says, and took photos of it without his consent. And soon he will lose his stock in the company his designs built up and any claim he might have to his rightful share of the Pickford fortune. Evie doesn't know what to say. An uncomfortable silence descends, the hum of the air conditioning and the overhead lights in the room now painfully loud. She can hear the creak of Gemma's chair and the shuffling of papers on the other side of the door. Misha starts talking softly, almost to himself. All those years of getting treated like shit. And Stuart didn't file until Greg beat up their dog. He wipes a hand over his face. They have this huge gray dog, some sort of mastiff. It's very shy. Greg likes to scare it, makes him feel like a big man, I guess. The dog growled back, so Greg punched the daylights out of it. Stuart He's passed into that looking glass world where it's not abuse because you deserve it, because you aren't as good as when they first loved you. And if you try just a little harder, dance around the landmines just a bit faster, throw the last sorry remains of yourself onto the black altar of your relationship, then you might magically win his affection back, like you had in those first happy days before you screwed everything up. Evie stands stock still, gripping her handbag to her chest as Misha pauses, chewing his bottom lip, momentarily lost in thought. He's not looking at her, but she knows he sees her. I did what I was paid to do, Misha says. But I also tried to make Stuart feel good about himself, realize he was worthy of love, just as he was. He's a really good person, Evie. He seemed like it, Evie says. Misha looks down, his voice quiet and rough. I want you to remember something, Evie. I break up marriages for money. He moves his hands from his lap to rest on either side of his hips, gripping the edge of the desk. The action tenses the muscles in his arms and shoulders, and Evie is once again all too conscious of the 200-odd pounds of solid bulk that makes up his body, of the ruthless practiced efficiency with which he had taken down the 2 bodyguards the previous night. He looks up at her, his eyes twin chips of Arctic ice. But I ruin abusers for free.
That was completely fantastic. Thank you so much. Heartbreak Incorporated is available now, and you can pick it up from our website and from all good book retailers. Alex, thank you so much for being with me and being our first guest.
I've had a lovely time. I'm sorry if I went on too long, but you got me started talking about the craft of writing, which means I will guarantee never shut up.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for listening. We'll see you again next month. And in the meantime, make sure you signed up to the RP Book Club newsletter for all the latest and exclusive offers and discounts.